So the other half of the presentation then is how I'm studying Mandarin personally. And I'll break this into a few parts. I'll talk about how I learned Mandarin, but my case is kind of special, so it might not be very helpful. So I'm going to instead study on kind of the key things that I learned about some of the main problems in language learning, which are pronunciation, memory, and which things to learn. And I'll talk about how I currently learn. So why I say that my experience isn't very helpful is that before I learned Mandarin, I lived in Japan for university and I worked in Russia for a while. So I'd already studied like 3 different languages to a quite good level. And so when I began studying Mandarin, I already knew several thousand characters and I already knew how um, I learn languages. So like I had a lot of advantages. For my personal case, the first thing I did is I went to a website called italki, which is kind of like Airbnb for language teachers. You type the language that you're studying and you can put in things like if you want a professional or a casual teacher and the price, and it gives you teachers who match your preferences. I found a speech therapist, which is somebody that focuses on like if children struggle to make certain sounds, they teach the children how to use their mouth correctly. And I did several sessions talking about how the pronunciation of Chinese differs from English. And then after that, I came to Taiwan and I just kind of started using it. I was at a bilingual school for 1 year, and then I've worked east of Taipei, the capital, for 4 years. And it's kind of scary, but the thing about like living in the country is that you get this kind of proof as you talk to people that even if you're not perfect, you understand what they say and they understand you. And if not, you can ask questions or like phrase things differently. So you get kind of used to speaking it. And my wife is also Taiwanese. We speak English at home, but it helps to have like a native speaker that you're close to. And then what I think is the most important part for me is that I found that I really like webtoons. They're comics that are in Mandarin, and I read a lot of them. And as a just as I read a lot, I learned more Chinese words and how sentences work and stuff like that. So since maybe for most people like I was able to do this because I knew the characters already, but for most people, like here are the practical problems and kind of the key things that I learned, and maybe they'll be helpful. So when you learn a new language, there are really 4 types of sounds. There are some that are shared, which you can skip because they're shared. There are certain sounds that are in English or your native language, but not in Chinese, and you should avoid making these sounds. There are some sounds that are in Mandarin, but not in your native language, and you need to learn these sounds. And there are some sounds that are similar, but not quite the same, and you can adjust these over time. And so more specifically, something that I learned from the speech therapist that I found really useful is that a lot of people worry about the tones in Mandarin, but actually, like a lot of languages have tones. If you speak English, then you know how to use the tones. The difference is just that in English, we use tones to convey emotional information, whereas in Mandarin, they're a quite mechanical thing that separates how, like, differentiating words. So, for example, in English, if we say, like, this is the 4 tones of Mandarin, we have the high tone, like ma, and then the right low to high, the ah, the low tone, ma, and then the dropping tone, ma. And we actually have all 4 of these in English. So if you imagine the word dude and somebody says like, dude, like you're annoyed, or if you're a little bit scared or you're not sure what's going on, you might be like, dude. Here, I don't know how to describe this emotion, but you can say like, dude. And then the last one, if you're angry, you can say, dude. So, it's like we actually use these same tones in English. We use them for different things than Mandarin does. So and I know that not everybody's a native English speaker, but like lots of languages use tone to communicate emotion. So know that you can do tones. It'll take a bit of practice to learn to make them like on command. The second thing that's difficult for English speakers is this sound, yu. Mandarin has 2 u sounds. There's u and there's yu. And the difference is that this common sound e is so the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, it's a special alphabet used to describe sounds because it can be kind of inconsistent between languages. So like the word a and the word a in like graph and hard and bra, that it's the same a. And so to get around this, linguists use a different alphabet. And you don't need to understand what this means, but the key point is that the E sound, which we have in English, is close front unrounded vowel. And the U sound, the difficult one, is a close front rounded vowel. So the only difference is in this unrounded versus rounded nature. But actually, we have a rounded sound in English, which is the close back rounded vowel. So to make this sound, the U, all you have to do is say E, but round your lips as if you were saying oo. So we got E, oo, and U. And then a last pronunciation thing is about some tongue position. There's a few sounds in Mandarin that are normally difficult for English speakers. And the first is these three pairs, the like ji, qi, si. And I think the way that what helped me learn these sounds was understanding that they're actually different. We have a sh sound in English, but it's different than the one in Mandarin. So if you look at the picture, you can see that in English, the tip of the tongue rises up kind of, there's this little bump behind your top row of teeth. If you like, take your tongue and go on your mouth, like along the top of your mouth, you'll feel it. And we lift the tip of our tongue to this bump. In Mandarin, actually, they don't do that. The tip of the tongue is below the bottom teeth and the middle of the tongue rises up. So if we compare English shi with Mandarin xi, like xi, shi, you can kind of hear a difference. And then similarly, in English, the R sound is made by taking your tongue and pulling it back in your mouth. It goes backwards and towards the top of your mouth. But in Mandarin, actually, the back of your tongue doesn't do anything. Instead, the tip of your tongue rises really high up toward, like, slightly bending backwards. So in English, we have and in Mandarin, there's so again, it's different, but the tongue is very different. It helped me to see the diagram. And the second problem is forgetting. And this is like, people don't have bad memories. We just naturally, as humans, we forget things. You could imagine, like, if you remembered every single, like how many ceiling tiles were on the class in your second grade classroom, there's just so much unimportant information that we go through. And our brain tries to get rid of that information so that we can use it on more important things. And this is an important problem because if you're learning Mandarin, there aren't exact numbers for the TOCFL, but looking at the HSK, you need to know, like, to pass the highest level, 3,000 characters. Whereas by the time that a native Taiwanese speaker is in ninth grade, actually they know 3,700. So like, there's a lot of characters you need to learn, and actually it's still less than Taiwanese people know. So we need to learn a lot of things. And the good news is that like, we're not bound to forget things. We've known for more than 150 years that if we periodically review things, we gradually remember more and more. So what this graph is showing is that if we don't review, within just a week, we forget almost everything that we've learned. But with each review, it gets a little bit more firm in our memory. And two is what's called the serial position effect, is that we tend to remember better the first and the last thing that we learn rather than what's in the middle. And so the point is that it's better to have several short sessions, like study every day for 20 minutes, instead of one long session, like study once per week for an hour or two. And the last useful thing for memory is what's called spaced repetition, and that there are different types of, like, some things we remember better than others. And so this is kind of a filtering process where if you get something correct, then you can study it less often. And if you get something wrong, you study it more often. You can do this yourself, like I used shoeboxes when I first started, but there's also some open source applications. One of them is named Anki. If you Google SR spaced repetition app, you can see it. But basically, they keep track of what you know and don't know, so that you spend, like, more time studying things you struggle with and less time with things you know well. So it makes your time a bit more efficient. Two examples: when I first started studying Mandarin, I used two applications, or I used two decks of flashcards. I used the same application called Anki, which is it's free on the computer and on Android, and it has a cost on iOS. But I used a deck of vocabulary with about 5,000 words, and then I used a deck of grammar, which was a grammar dictionary put into form, about 6,000 words, and I did 4 vocabulary words and 6 grammar cards a day for. It took me about 3 years. And the last problem is so to pass the C-level TOCFL test, is you need to know about 8,000 words, and like there's a lot of words. But the thing is that words aren't actually made equally. There are certain words that appear much, much, much more common than other words. And so if you look at this chart, what it's saying is that the most common 1,000 words actually are roughly 78% of like what you see in a text. So like if you learn 1,000 words, then you can recognize 80% of a text. And then it kind of goes on and so that if you learn 2,000 words, you go up to about 85. 3,000 words is about 88. And eventually you get to this point here, like going from word 8,000 to word 9,000, you only increase your coverage by like less than 1%. And this is a statistical phenomenon and occurs across all languages. And the point is just that some words are more important than other words. So you shouldn't be just learning any words, but you should be like focusing on common words that are likely to be useful. And why this is important, my main background is in Japanese, so I don't have a good Chinese example. But as we saw, there are some words are used more commonly than others. And what's more is that the most common words differ from like place to place. So this Japanese word "ore" means I. Japanese has several different ways to say I, and this one is kind of a rude term that is used by men. Um, it's the way that most adult men would refer to themselves when they're with friends or family. And so if you're on Netflix, this is actually the 10th most common word on Netflix, because anytime a man is talking about himself, he'll use this word. But if you look on Wikipedia, which is mostly third-person articles and not people saying, I think, I this, I that, it goes down to 2,500. And if you look in a newspaper, this word is actually like outside of the top 10,000 words, because this word is too rude, too casual to appear in a formal place like a newspaper. And like every word has some kind of a pattern like this, where depending on what you want to do, certain words might be much more and less common. So you really have to think about, what do I want to do with Chinese, and what words do I need to do that? Because, like if you want to read the newspaper, you could learn this word, but it's kind of useless for reading the newspaper. And the last problem that I'll go through quickly is that even though we said that some words are very rare, that doesn't actually mean that they're useless. The kind of research has found that these rarer words tend to have more information than more common words. So an example of this is like, I went to the, 80% of the words, I went to the, but what you're missing, the thing you don't understand, is the place that I actually went. So even though you understand 80% of the words, you don't get 80% of the meaning. You're missing the really important thing. And so this is another reason to like focus on your particular goal or interest so that you learn the keywords for what you need to do. And as a couple like small bonuses, language isn't so much like math, where like in English we say it's raining heavily, but it doesn't matter if you know how to, like in English this is a dummy verb, this is the third person, this is raining, it's the ing makes it into what's called the perfective aspect to show it's happening, or the progressive aspect to show it's happening right now, and this is an adverb heavily. But it doesn't matter if you know how to do that stuff in Chinese, because actually Mandarin says rain down and then like big. So you can't just perfectly translate one to the other. It's important to learn like how do they describe things in Mandarin, which might be different than English. And the second thing is like knowledge is not so much as, it's not a binary, like something that you either know or you don't know, but it's kind of a spectrum. And as we go through our lives, like if you think of the word birthday, for example, you're going to think of cake, and you're going to think of balloons and party and friends and family smiling and presents. And so like the word birthday isn't just by itself. There's all these other things that are connected to it. And I have a picture of a squirrel here because when I was like 12 years old, I was riding my bike home from school, And suddenly a squirrel jumped out of a tree and it landed on my bicycle and it scared me and I fell down into a ditch. And so like I developed a fear of squirrels and like it scares me a little bit. But you know, just knowing that the word for squirrel in Mandarin is hongshu doesn't like the within this string of sounds there isn't that same instinctual like uncomfortableness as there is in the English word squirrel. So I just want to say that like to take these words and make them more tangible, more concrete, it's important to like use Mandarin and have experiences so that you don't just know the translation of a word, but you have an actual like feel for how this word is used. So the way that I currently study, and I'll mention this is the company that I work for, but I've used the product for 3 years and only worked there for a couple of months, so I feel comfortable sharing it. What Migaku is that it's a browser extension for Google Chrome, and it makes subtitle or like text, whether that's in subtitles on Netflix or like on a web page, it makes them interactive. So I'm reading a web novel right now called Soul Land, and normally it appears like this, but after I turn the extension on, it looks like this. And there's a few things. The colors represent tones. So green is third tone, the orange is second tone, blue is fourth tone, red is first tone. And more than that is that if you see a word you don't know, you can just click on it and it comes up with a dictionary definition. Or you can see pictures, example sentences, a ChatGPT explanation, or some recordings of native speakers saying it. And if you think a word is useful, then you can click this orange button and it takes that and puts it into a flashcard. If you're doing like Netflix or something, it'll take a screenshot of the screen also, and then it makes a flashcard based out of that and like prompts you to study over time. So it becomes really easy just to like, you know, the way that I study Mandarin is just I read books, and when I say useful words, I turn them into flashcards and I study them over time. And that way, um, like, because I'm reading things I'm interested in, I know that all of the vocabulary and stuff that I'm learning is relevant to my interests. So that's how I study Mandarin now. That's my presentation, and as I mentioned, here are the like links that we mentioned earlier. So if you want to take a picture of the QR code or something, you can see the screen.